Awesome, awesome. Good day, everyone, and happy Thursday. Welcome to our Intact event for today, supporting her, healing, empowerment, and recovery. And we'll give everyone just a few minutes to come in. We are so excited that you are here. Again, you could be anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us today. So we are super excited. And we'll ask that you share with us where you are coming in from, where are you joining us from. So my name is Dr. Tanisha Freeman Foster. I am coming to you today from Tampa Bay, Florida, also known as the land of the Seminole people. And again, welcome. And we will introduce our amazing facilitator shortly. Just pause here just to give everyone a few more seconds to come in. Right, before we get started, if you just share, how are you feeling today? How are you coming into the session? I see some dancing. Yes, Chandra. Yes. So if you can share with an emoji or something that describes how you're feeling today, how you're coming into this session, that would be amazing. And again, our goal is to make sure this is interactive. We know that some of the topics that we will discuss can be heavy, and we encourage you to do what you need in a healthy way to take care of yourself. If that means going off camera, if that means taking a break and coming back, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. We're also inserting a break within the session, so we want you to be aware of that as well. All right, so just a disclaimer, this information that we are sharing is not endorsed or produced by SAMHSA or the Department of Health and Human Services or Intact. The information that we are sharing is specifically been created and tailored by our phenomenal presenter for today, and these are her opinions, thoughts, and words. Session security. In the case of security issues, we do not foresee anything occurring here today, but in case of security issues, this session will be closed down and we will send a new Zoom link. That also applies to if anything happens with the Zoom where there's some type of glitch, we will send out information of how to rejoin the session. So again, this session is being brought to you by Intact, which is our National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Child, Youth, and Family Mental Health. This slide provides an overview of our partners, which include CARS, which is the prime for this grant. We also have the University of Texas at Austin, FREDLA, Change Matrix, Youth Move National, Georgetown, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. And the importance of this is that we expand across the age range. So we're not specifically focused at one age, but we've made sure that we have engaged various partners in this work so we can look at the family dynamics from various lived experiences, from various perspectives and various places throughout the child to adult and young adulthood span. So this is a part of our 365 Black, and why we are centering in 365 Black, because we know that we exist as Black people 12 months, 365 days a year. And so we just want to acknowledge the Black brilliance and innovation that is here at our Intact Center. So this is a little bit about the services and our vision. Our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. And this diagram provides just a glimpse of the services that we provide at no charge to you all. And so this session happens to be one of them. We ask that at the end, you will receive a link to complete a survey. And we ask that you please take time to complete that survey, because this allows us to continue to provide these services at no charge. It also lets our providers know that we are hitting on important topics that the individuals in various industries and throughout mental health would like to hear about. And it allows us the opportunity to learn what worked well, what did not work well, what we can improve on in the future, and what you would like to learn about in the future. All right, so we also want to remind you that registration is now open for our System of Care Virtual Summit in 2024. It is May 14th through 16th. Although it seems to be far away, May is actually right around the corner. So please take time to register for this summit. I'm also honored and grateful to serve as a keynote for this summit. So we look forward to seeing each of you there. So some commonly asked questions. You will receive a certificate of completion at the end of this event. We are also recording the session, so you will receive a link to the recording and a copy of the slide deck after the session. With that being said, we are recording this session. If there are questions that you would like to ask that you don't feel comfortable raising your hand asking during the question section, or that you don't feel comfortable putting in the chat, you can send them privately to myself or our facilitator, Stacy, and we will respond to those without using your name. All right, so now that we've gotten business out the way, again, I want to welcome you to today's session, Supporting Her, Healing, Empowerment, and Recovery. And we want to make sure that we are using affirming language that is respectful, that is grounded in curiosity and not judgment and labels, and that we are creating a space that is inclusive of all of our journeys. And we know that each journey is individual. Some of us have been doing this for a long time. Some of us have just started out, but wherever we are, there's always an opportunity to learn. All right, so without further ado, I am going to introduce our awesome powerhouse facilitator today. She is a boss and a beast in this peer space and making sure that we talk about equity in a way that is healing, but also in a way that is authentic. And so I will introduce Stacy Thompson. She is the founder and CEO of Equilibrium LLC. And so please join me in giving a virtual round of applause for our phenomenal guest speaker today, Stacy Thompson. I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me good?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to make sure. All right. And so the first thing I want to do before I get into the presentation itself is I want to acknowledge the land that I am on. I am here. I am projecting from San Diego, California. And so San Diego County, which is the land of the Kumeyaay people, also known as Ipai Tipai. And one of the things I like to talk about when I'm doing a land acknowledgement is because I don't like to do things in a cookie cutter way and just kind of, okay, we're doing the checklist. Oh, everyone does this land acknowledgement. So let me just, say these words and then move on. I want to talk about just briefly why I want to do the land acknowledgement. And that is because for me, it is a meaningful thing that the land we occupy belongs to people who have been here. The Kumeyaay people here, where I am here in California, they've occupied this area for over 10,000 years in this area. And so the fact that we occupy this area and we kind of go, oh, well, let's acknowledge that this land, the original inhabitants of this land real quick, when it for me doesn't really acknowledge what is still happening, that we're still occupying their land, right? Stolen people on stolen land is how I feel about my particular experience. And so, when we talk about that acknowledgement is, are we acknowledging the fact that, we're still occupying land that belongs to someone else? And so for me, that is really important, in that the land as well was meant to be set aside for them. 18 California tribes there was meant to be a treaty to set aside 8.5 million acres for them. And because the California state they opposed that, couldn't get passed in the Senate. And so they are down to 500,000. That is 500,000. That is not even an eighth of what was meant for the 18 tribes that were originated in this area. And so just acknowledging that is for me really important because they're still here. They still exist. And so that is important for me to acknowledge. And so then I want to move on to this, the expectations. I know that Dr. T um, talked about some of what was how we'd like to present for today, kind of covering some of the ways that we want to use our language intentionally. And for me, I want to talk about the expectations for myself, and that I invite you all to join, meet that expectation with me if you can, or if you so choose. And that is, number one, wanting to validate other people's experiences. So the experience doesn't have to match mine for that to be a valid experience. My experience and your experience can coexist without with holding multiple truths, that even if our experiences don't mirror one another's, that they're just as valid. And so one does not invalidate the other. That is important to know, that for today, this conversation is specifically about Black women, because this is our Black 365 series, and because March happens to be Women's History Month as well. And so at that intersection is Black women. And so, mind you, that doesn't mean that other people won't be able to hear something that they can take away from this, because a lot of the things I'm talking about um, don't are not exclusive to Black women. And other people have experiences that overlap, that mirror some of these. And yet, specifically for today, this platform, this time, we're centering Black women. And so, um, I say that also for, to for people to be able to hold, that this is not to disregard anyone else's experience or any other cultural experience. Particularly if you're other women of color, you will probably be able to relate very much. White women will probably be able to relate to some of this even. And so, take what you will. And if some of this does not resonate, um, take it as a learning experience. And so we don't have to go, well, what about what happened with these people? And what about what happened with this? Well, I'm, if I'm not speaking to that, that's because what I'm speaking to today is Black women, and in my experience and the experiences of the Black women who shared their experiences with me. Okay, and that's not disregarding anyone else's, but this is who I'm centering for today. Okay. Also, this is interactive, so I'm gonna want people to give me feedback while so I'm gonna be asking questions, gonna be wanting some answers back. So you can type it in to the chat. If you're feeling brave, you can unmute yourself when I when I ask for some feedback, because this is a discussion. As you can see, it's a mental health discussion, and so I want there to be back and forth on this. And so for that matter, I'm not going to be policing anyone's statements, their language, and at the same time, it's that freedom of speech also comes with accountability. And so if you speak your mind and know that somebody may disagree and feel differently, and that's okay too. As long as we all, honor each other's experience. Again, holding multiple truths, right? That all these things can coexist. Okay. And then most importantly, withholding our judgment, because again, our experiences vary so much. And so you may not know how what someone went through because of how they present, or what someone is even dealing with right now. in this moment. And so, to reserve that judgment. And if you have some questions, is to think about it with kind of curiosity, um, and ask questions in order to get more information. Um, okay, and so with that, I want to also just jump right in to a quick icebreaker for everyone to kind of join in, and that is, I see a lot of names over here, a lot of faces, and so if you just, and I'm gonna shorten this to 5 minutes. Take your name. This is called personalized acronym. So take your name, letters in your name, and think about, for every letter in your name, one word that is associated with you. So it could be a word that describes you, it could be a place that you like going to, it could be a food that you like to eat. And then just type it into the chat and share. And so that might take a few minutes for some of you, but so I'll just start off with mine, give y'all time some think about yours. And so with mine being Stacy, Stacy, the first one being S, I am sensitive. I am very sensitive. And so T, thoughtful. I think I'm pretty thoughtful. Sometimes I overthink things sometimes. Um, A is for my ADHD. I'm neurodivergent on the spectrum, so that comes in and impacts a lot of challenges, or a lot of situations and relationships and activities. And so, but I love that about myself because it means that I process things differently. And so, I the world needs people who see things from a little differently than others. And C, I had a problem kind of deciding between curious, because I love asking questions. Questions are my favorite thing. Oh, why this? And where did that come from? And how do we do this? Oh, I'm seeing some come in and I'm loving it. Destiny, dynamic, extra. I love that. I'm sorry, let me get back to mine. Sorry, ADHD. Okay, and then so deciding between curious and cinephile, because I love movies. Cinephile. I love watching movies. My favorite are horror movies and comedies and, well, and animated movies, but and then why? That was difficult for me. So I just chose another acronym that speaks to me, and that's YOLO. You only live once, and that's one of my guiding principles. Sometimes why not? Because you only live once. And so I see some of them, and I would like to share a few that I am seeing. Okay, Joy. Joy, you have it right in your name. Joyful, happy. Um, yes, let me get Destiny. There it was. Dynamic, extra social, tedious, intelligent, nice, oh, impactful. That is awesome. Alive, mindful, youthful. Thank you, Amy. Thank you. Okay, thank you all. Oh, okay, I'm just reading through the chat so I can see. And actually, that also helps me keep the names in mind, because I like to get names with some of the faces that I'm seeing, and it just helps me retain that information. So thank you very much. Okay. Um, wait a minute, because I feel like I'm missing some here. Hold on, let me see if I can scroll through. Maybe okay, here we go. There we go. Some more. Yvette, youthful, vivacious, entertaining, talented, tough, encourager. Okay, Cynthia, creative, youthful, neat, thoughtful, heart, intelligent, aware. Tia, traveler, independent, achiever. Okay, I love this. All right. Yes, yes. Tabitha, thankful, animated. I'm also getting some more ideas. So next time I do this, I'm like, okay, here's some more words that are descriptive. And okay, yes, Yolanda, youthful, observant, last, audacious, nocturnal. That is a good one. Doing the most, all inclusive. Yes, yes. Meticulous, artistic, realistic, youthful, merry. Okay. Tanika, thoughtful, emotional, nice, empathy, kind, aware. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm gonna love this. So if you could save this chat for me, Dr. T, because I'm gonna need to go through all these. But so I want to talk about first before I advance to the next slide. I want to start off asking everyone here about recovery. When you hear that word, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you? And if you can type it in, healing, growth, addiction, everyday journey, wellness, healing, trauma, hope, process, resilience. Yes. Bounce back. Yes. Healing, getting better, overcoming, better. Okay, great. Great. And so I am someone who identifies as a peer. And so, in the realm of behavioral health or mental health, people who are peers are people who have lived experience of mental health challenges, and so when I talk about, in general, my experiences, it's because I have a unique perspective on some of those things that is very helpful to remind some people and very helpful to educate people with. And so, one of the things that comes up in talking about recovery is, and I love that so many people say have healing and wellness. I mean, that is important. And one of the challenges that I run into a lot, especially working in the field and kind of working with other professionals, and a lot of times there would be some assumptions being made, specifically around um, sometimes addiction or substance use, and because a lot of the times when we talked about recovery, especially in the past years, in the past, that recovery was specific to people who were, uh, you know, using substances or abusing substances. And it's very hard for us to broaden the idea of recovery, and again, in particularly in the area of behavioral health or mental health, to include um, across the board that idea of wellness and healing that everyone deserves. That is not specific to any particular population of people, but something that is important for everyone. And so, Dr. T, if you could advance to the next slide. And so, what I would like to talk about is here. I want to make sure that we are kind of broadening the way we look at the word recovery. And so, we start off with SAMHSA's uh, uh, definition of recovery. That's a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. That's all well and good. I mean, I actually do think that's a really well-rounded definition of recovery. It's definitely a process. It's definitely meant to, be transformational, if you will. And the importance and significance is it's self-directed. Um, One of the definitions of recovery that kind of resonated with me is the one that's found in Oxford Languages, and that is the action or process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost. that particular meaning really resonated because and in this context of this discussion, one of the things I do like to focus on the need for recovery and healing um, is when things, when you think about it in terms of, physical health or medical health, you think of recovery in terms of healing from a wound, right? Or healing from an injury. And so in that sense, recovery mental health recovery is similar to that. And that there's so many experiences that we have that impact us. And sometimes sometimes it's not even necessarily that it's a wound, but sometimes you need some respite from something happening. This is something that's, it's kind of like being in a noisy area and you're getting so much noise, and I need a moment of silence to recover from all that, chaos and noise. And so one of the ideas of the core of to recovery for me is asking the question, who was I meant to be? If there were, if conditions were ideal, if, conditions, if you didn't experience things that harmed you or left, everlasting impact on you, things that may have changed your path or made you shy away from certain things or gravitate towards other things, who were you meant to be? And so for me, that is a very important question. And so when we talk about the things that impact us, and I'm going to start off progressively, and if you could advance to the next slide. So I will start off with some of the things that almost everybody is impacted by. Talk about job stress, financial distress, just and mind you, that doesn't even necessarily mean that you don't have enough money, because sometimes having enough money means you have more responsibilities and obligations to do with that money. And that can be just as stressful. And so financial distress can go either way. It's the fact that it is causing you some disruption. Being worried about your physical health, your wellness, that is significant and all encompassing, especially if anyone and again, this is me talking from my personal experience of having struggled with weight and weight loss for most of my life. It is an actual intentional thing for me to have to okay, watch what I'm eating, make sure I'm being active. What's the calorie intake on this? What is the nutritional intake on this? Nutrition is so important. And so those things for some people are more impactful and need more intent than it is for some people. Some people that comes second nature. Grief or loss. That's one that impacts everyone eventually, because everyone experiences loss. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a death of a person um, or death of a pet, because that is significant for some people. But it can also mean the loss of a job, loss of a relationship, um, moving from one place to another, losing that community, losing those neighbors. Um, you know, just there is a grieving process that and much in the way of recovery, that when you take the time to kind of look at how some of these things affect us, that you can see the parallels in a variety of areas. It's not there is no one specific meaning. It it is all encompassing. Substance use misuse. And while earlier I was talking about some of the ways in which we talk about or we think about recovery in terms of substance use, but even the way we think of substance use is not just, you know, talking about drugs and alcohol. Um, it is also talking about sugar. People can be addicted to sugar. Sugar can negatively impact you, impact your health. In oh my gosh, I mean, um, artificial sweeteners, caffeine, the things that the ways in which we use things that are not that that we consume that may not be kind of organic to our systems, and we become dependent on them in some ways. And so you know then, as I was just talking about, grief and loss, relationships in general are challenging. And so they need work, constant attention. And so maintaining relationships is something that can be stressful. And then of course, and this is not, an exhaustive list by any means, but these are the ones that came to me. Because over the years, as I've had discussions with other people, these are the things that come up a lot. Um, and in my work as a peer support specialist, these things, kind of when people talk to you about what's going on in their lives, you can bet that at least I was about to say at least one, but usually at least two of these things will come up in that conversation. But also, I wanted to talk about the challenges of parenting, which we it's not just parenting, it's caregiving, period. Because it may be parenting your children, it may be caring for elderly parents or other members of your family. It could even be taking care of a pet. And here in California, pet insurance is required for pet owners. so so all of the things that go into having to worry about keeping something else alive in your life, keeping something alive and keeping them well-being, keeping the well-being of those things. And so this is something that almost anyone can identify with. It doesn't have to be even specific to gender. And so on the next slide, I get a little more focused and talk about the things that are for people who identify in certain ways, or the things that kind of adding some of the intersections, right? So in general, and as we talk about a general population, right, is kind of how that the first kind of stressors were for anyone. But here is where the other differences start to come into place. Okay, so some of the ways in which the fine I'm sorry, classism, elitism. So that's your socioeconomic class, and basically, there it impacts everything. So I'll probably touch on that a little more later on. But talking about sexism and genderism. So when you do identify as a woman, or present as a woman, you're going to have some very specific experiences around that. Ableism, when you do not have a disability, or if you're someone who has an invisible disability, you're going to have some very specific experiences that are different from someone else. Me, as I identify, I am a queer person. I'm fluid. Uh, and so with that, anyone from the LGBT community, LGBTQIA, I think we're at LGBTQIAA now. But it could, it changes like every month. So but you know, biphobia, transphobia, homophobia, all of those things exist and they are very impactful. Employment equities, those are things that apply to all of those things, and yet um additional, it's the kind of the educational background that kind of some of that goes in with the classism, the elitism, well, sometimes requiring a a bachelor's degree for something that really doesn't require a degree, but sometimes that's done to filter out certain people from the job pool. There's also the healthcare disparities, as we know. And again, it, any of these identities can create, highlight these disparities. So, being a female, you're going to see some differences in care. Being someone with a disability is going to create some differences in your care. Being someone who's queer, being someone who is racialized in any way, is going to create some differences. Um, then there's also, kind of close to that because it impacts your health and your access to health. And that is, environmental injustice and the ways in which certain neighborhoods are you know, zoned for certain activities that, or, we can build highways through over here, we can put a dump over here, we can dump our waste over here, but not over here. And it generally impacts certain people different ways than it impacts others. And so the more of these identities you have, the more impacted you're going to be. Right. Um, oh, I see that someone is having a challenge hearing. Ebony, are you able to hear? Is everyone able to hear me? Okay. Okay. All right.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, um, and so also, I mean, and I will be getting deeper into the criminal injustice system, and but we know that that whole system is set up to kind of support another system of um profit, if you will. And so, it impacts certain populations, certain people in certain ways. Discrimination, prejudice, anything that makes you different. And then, of course, housing, food, and security. That's going to be also um, people who affecting certain areas and populations of people than it will others. And so these are things that happen regularly. And these are things that impact you in ways that are lasting. You know, when we talk about what does it look like for, you know, when especially employment inequity, because that's something that I'm really kind of passionate about, because that is really the root of your entire well-being. Because when you're living in a capitalist society, you have to pay for everything. You're paying to live, to be alive. You have to pay for your housing. You have to pay for food. You have to pay for childcare. You have to pay for transportation and pay for healthcare. And so if you are not employed, or if you're not being paid enough to cover all these expenses, your life is going to be impacted in a very different way. And access to some of the resources that you need going to be very different. And so those create specific experiences that are going to stick with you. Um, and so now when I'm talking about, again, these things that aren't, they're not specific to Black women, they're not specific to Black people. But again, once you start adding on some of these additional identities, things get a little more complicated and and impactful to your mental health as well as your physical health. I mean, you know, I think of those things as inseparable, quite frankly, because they're linked. And so if you're having challenges with physical health, you most likely will have experienced challenges with your mental health. Um, and so I want to go to the next slide, which is some of the things that are specific to. And again, because I'm my audience and I'm speaking to Black women, this is really targeted for Black women. And yet, even here, it's not solely specific, exclusive to us, but misogynoir is, and that is, the unique ways in which, like in the previous slide, we're talking about sexism and genderism, but the way that it manifests for Black women is very different. And because of that intersection of race and 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 the way we look at gender in our society. And so, anti-Blackness is part of that. And, when we talk about racism, one of the things that I have to, keep reminding people of is that racism has an inherent hierarchy to it. And so it's one of the reasons why, when people say, oh, well, that's reverse racism, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as reverse racism, because racism is a hierarchy that is endemic to that. So it's almost like saying, since we again live in a capitalist society, and so there's a class system, and so if you're to say, well, that's reverse classism because, a poor person is saying, well, rich people can afford to pay more, so we'll charge them more. Oh, well, that's classism. That's reverse classism. That's not a thing. And no one, I have never heard anyone say such a thing. That's because we know better. We automatically internalize that hierarchy. And so one of the challenges that, or at least for me, in talking to people about my experiences as a Black female presenting person is that, when I talk about racism, I literally have to talk about anti-Blackness specifically, for people to understand that there is a hierarchy because, even in talking about, if you talk about white supremacy, people get, they bristle at that term. And it's because, sometimes we've conflated racism with hatred or racism with extremism, when racism is a philosophy that's as much a part of this country as as capitalism is. It's part of our it's part of our society. It's woven in. And I will be circling back around to that shortly. And so, um, talking about, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up here. And so, and even the ways in which substance use is, again, across the board, it happens, but the way it impacts our community is different. Why? Because of capitalism and racism, right? And then so the war on drugs impacted us in a way that it didn't impact other communities. And so, then there's the idea of internalized racism, the colorism, texturism. That's the new one, right? About the hair, about that good hair thing, and oh, that bad hair. What? But and all of that really is that internalized kind of white supremacy. Um, Medical scientific racism. This is something that we're just now starting to center in conversations. I know I didn't hear a lot of it growing up, but if you want to understand why, kind of the root of the disparities in healthcare, and a lot of it is due to medical and scientific racism, where some things that were kind of foundational to the medical field beliefs that were kind of foundational to the medical field that just kind of never really went away. And so the idea that um, Black people have thicker skin, so therefore we don't feel pain, like literally thicker skin, that they're, you know, some of these doctors actually believe that. Even in this day and age, in 2024, there are still people who believe that. Um, so we don't feel pain like that. And so therefore, you know, then uh uh our pain isn't taken as seriously, or people aren't listening to us, and which really can, I mean, that can be life endangering, to be dismissive of someone's pain. Pain is a significant message. And so if you don't listen to that, that can endanger your life. And yet, something as simple as, yeah, they can handle that, can be deadly. Um, educational disparities, where, investing money in public schools, that impacts us differently. Um, and I say, see, commercial and mass incarceration. And one of the reasons I say commercial incarceration is because of the privatization of prisons. And so when you see the privatization of prisons, you're seeing people who are going to need to fill those prisons, right? And so then you see, legislation being passed for these kinds of things, to make these sorts of laws, um, you know, uh, 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 to make people, to make these things more than just, oh, we can write a ticket for it. No, we can incarcerate and imprison someone for it. That is a very different thing. Um, and so again, this is something that impacts us differently. And so even when we talk about mass incarceration and commercial incarceration, generally we center Black men in this conversation, and we overlook that there are a lot of Black women who are also caught up in this carceral system. And it impacts us differently, and particularly upon reentry. That's also an experience I speak from, as a matter of fact. I am someone who, justice involved is, I guess, the term we call it here in California. But I've been in jail, I have been in prison. And so re-entering society is a very different experience for Black women. And so, I mean, already it's the idea that we're already dealing with just ground level just basic level discrimination and racism, but then when you add on that record, and how it's normalized to continue to discriminate against people when when they've done their time, they've rehabilitated themselves, because the system ain't gonna rehabilitate you, by the way. It's something you do intentionally on your own. You take that time to reflect and do what you need to do, and so when you get back out there, you still have to navigate all of these things, and where there are ways that you're excluded from certain jobs, excluded from living in certain places, and so it perpetuates this, the challenges, and it does weigh heavily on me. um And so that economic exploitation, again, capitalist system, I think so. Not too long ago, um, in California, and again, where I am, we've raised our minimum wage to, I think, it was 20, or I think it may have even been $22 actually. And so when we raised it to that amount, there were people going, well, that's, how can you force these businesses to pay? Now we're going to have to lay people off, and we're going to have to increase prices. And it's like, well, you could also take some of that out of your profit margin, because that profit margin is ridiculously high. And you don't have to hit the most vulnerable people with those costs to you. And so it's the challenge that it's people who literally are enriching themselves from your labor. That is something that I will circle around back to again when I talk about historical trauma. But when you think about the ways that when we talk about economic exploitation, it's not just being having our labor undervalued, um, but it's also it's having our labor undervalued, but at the to the for the benefit of someone else, who then in turn um, uses that benefit to further kind of perpetuate this idea that the reason you're in the place you are is not because of their exploitation, but because something's wrong with you. Like you're not meeting our expectations, not because I'm taking advantage of you or have the system that is meant to do so, but it's because you're just not working hard enough. For me, that's just so ridiculous. And it's that gaslighting that literally we've normalized. That's just part of employment. um and then of course for me, oh, okay, I kind of skipped over to workplace trauma, but police brutality, of course, that is part of our experience. And that again, why our communities are over policed. There's this idea that you know well, for one, there's the idea that there's a such thing as black on black crime. So, well, there's black on black crime, and so that's what's happening. And so we need to police these people. And it's like, that's just correct. That's just crime. That's how crime works, right? Crime is about proximity. The people around you are the people that crimes are committed against people who are around you. Exactly. Crime is crime. And so this idea that, well, no, it's crime is uniquely exclusive to our community somehow, and so therefore we need to be policed more, and therefore our uh, 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 punishments need to be harsher. And it is, how many times when we can see a situation play out or an incident play out where it's someone is being accused of a crime who is black, versus seeing the same situation play out with someone who's white, and then just hearing the way people even talk about it, the language that's even used. Well, why don't they just comply, right? When it's black people, but then when it's white people, they're like indignant. How you can't do that? They have rights. Well, we all have rights, but somehow it's easier to it's easier to forget those rights. I just saw in the chat someone wrote January 6th. I'm like, right? That is I remember there was gosh, I was reading an article, and I mean, the fact that it's like I can't even choose one out of the plethora of articles of someone, a black woman being brutalized or even shot down because of being suspected of committing a crime. And then they're like, well, they stole something, or they thought they stole something, and you're just like, okay. And so you couldn't just get a warrant and come back and talk to that person later. You had to chase them, you had to shoot them down. And why not? Because you literally let people on January 6th, attempt to overturn the democratic process. And they took they took time, months, to track those people down. Those people were able to do what they do, and they leisurely, had dinner, they saw, they did some sightseeing, they flew back home, and just as nothing happened. And then, and then they used technology to find them. They didn't, it was a very different way that was handled versus how that would have played out. Oh my goodness. If that was a different population of people. And and just the way those things change the way you even move, the decisions you make, how you choose to handle the way that you even talk about these things. It's, even when we talk about, I talked about this a little earlier, but even when you talk about racism, it's like we have to choose our words because that's going to trigger someone. And so we can't even freely discuss our own experiences, for fear of always being policed in some way. And so, which for me goes right into the workplace trauma. I was having a conversation with one of my, actually former coworker, but and friend. But one of the things I had noted was, because one of the things I talk about a lot, in the last year's Black 365, I did a session on workplace trauma, particularly for Black people, how that impacts Black people. Um, and so, even though I'm not going to get as much into it here, but as a matter of fact, I will be sharing a link with you on a TED Talk, where I for a lady who did directed a documentary about workplace trauma, and specifically for Black women, and the ways that we experience it, the impact of it. Oh, it's great. But the idea is, when you think of that economic exploitation that I was talking about before, and kind of the ways in which our workplace echoes some of the historical aspects of labor exploitation. Um, having some of these things parallel, when and one of the things I talked about is, to my friend was, even when we think about the ways of having our behavior policed at work, right? Because we have overseers at work, supervisors at work, who are trying to make sure that we're meeting all the demands for our, the CEO or the administrator or whoever is, at the higher levels of the management. And you have people right in the middle, and they kind of set it up that way so that they can, have some benefits. Of course, they don't have the same advantages at those at the top, but you give them just enough so that they'll keep everyone else in line. That's something that we deal with all the time. And quite often, when, for me, even the idea of professionalism is centered in kind of white culture. Because when you think about, um, who, when we, so there were professions, and then there was labor, right? When you think about those types of jobs, think about professions. Who were allowed to be professionals? It wasn't people of color. It wasn't Black folk. Well, we were labor, right? And so then who created kind of the conditions or the terms for what professionalism is meant to look like? And women weren't in white women weren't part of that workforce. So when you think about that, it was centered in it was white men who kind of created those conditions, the terms, and defined what professionalism is meant to look like. And so from that, it's okay, automatically those ideas are echoes of our past, and yet that's something we never get to talk about. Right? If we talk about it, then it's sometimes you start getting the whataboutism. Well, what about this group of people, and what about us, and this happened for this people. And yeah, no, I understand that, and again, a lot of overlaps, a lot of similar experiences. But when you have this in your background, there are very specific um, ideas that are being revisited here, trauma that's being revisited. Okay, and so if we could, okay, I'm a little bit over time now. Pacing myself, but I'm a little over time. So want to talk about historical trauma. So this is again, um, and mind you, this whole talk is not going to be just about historical trauma. I mean, and not just about trauma and stress and all this. Because once we take our break and come back from our break, we are going to talk about the recovery principles and how we navigate these things. And so, but what I wanted to talk about is another element that that all of these things for me are connected. And so that goes into the historical trauma. And so historical trauma, and this is how I'm defining it for the intents of this presentation: cumulative, multi-generational, collective experience of emotional and psychological injury in communities and their descendants. So again, that's the definition I'm using for the intents of this presentation. So one of the things we you know automatically think about is we think about slavery. But one of the things I've often um kind of saw is the differences in the phrases for the words that we use. One of the things, especially now, there's this huge campaign to address human trafficking, and we call it human trafficking in terms of the population again. And I go, well, how come these aren't words that we use to describe what was happening here? Is it because we forget about enslaved people being human? Where they were victims of human trafficking. And so when you think about the ways in which we talk about, um even now when we talk about these rings of human trafficking, what is happening, those things, you can literally take all those impacts and all those related activities, and this was related to slavery. These are the experiences that were directly related. So for servitude, then it wasn't just slavery, right? It was all the things that went along with it, the things that came afterwards. And so, I don't want to go into these each and every one, but just I gave examples because we know. um, but I do want to advance to the next slide because, and I hope this isn't going to, because I know I put some animations in the presentation initially that I hope isn't going to be a challenge here. Okay, thank you. So one of the things that was really important and why I needed to this slide and the next slide, but this one I wanted to start here, and that is this is a copy from our Library of Congress of the copy of the Declaration of Independence, which quotes, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," right? That all men are created equal. I mean, all of us can almost we know these things. We heard them ad infinitum throughout childhood and school. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? This was part of our Declaration of Independence. The words written by one Thomas Jefferson, which, oh, I have so much. I could do a whole presentation on that dissonance from that gentleman, or if you will. But the ways in which these are the foundational beliefs of our country. And yet, if we go to the next slide, we'll see that the same person who wrote those, and by the way, I took that out of the reason I even used that particular image is because that was in his handwriting. That was his copy in his handwriting. That's in the Library of Congress. And so then if you could advance like slide, oh, did you already? Yes, you did. And that is the same person who hand wrote those words also wrote in the notes on the state of Virginia that Blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to whites in the endowments both of body and mind. And so when this person wrote that Declaration of Independence, he was not including the people that he did not believe were the same as him, right? But we know this because it's enshrined and codified in our founding documents. And so when you talk about that, so when you start off thinking about that, even then it helps to it helps put some perspective on why it is such a struggle to even talk to people about these challenges, because it's in the air we breathe. It's almost like, what's that analogy about fish swimming in water? Like, are they even aware that they're in water, that they're wet? And so that's how racism operates here. It's we know it exists, and yet there are people who that this has been so normalized they don't recognize it even. And mind you, these things are not even, you know, the target population, Black people, we aren't we are not shielded from these messages, that we also pick up on them and internalize them. And so just as much as racism is hierarchy, when we say, there's this idea I've heard people debating about, whether Black people can be racist. And of course Black people can be racist, but is it doesn't look the way people seem to think that racism looks. Can Black people be racist? Yes. And that racism looks like still adhering to that hierarchy of racism, right? Where it is white supremacy, right? Where there is a striation, if you will, of the various communities. And so when you internalize that, you're perpetuating that. You don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. Not all white people are white supremacists, and you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist, because all that means is that basically that's the default, unless you're actively examining and intentionally educating and making decisions to otherwise. The default is, again, it's woven into the fabric. It is what it is. It's codified in our Declaration of Independence. That's one of the reasons the amendments exist. When you see those amendments that change the status of our citizenship, or allow for us to be able to vote, those are things that had to be changed because that wasn't the original intent. We weren't people. And so with that, and I'm going to break right after this. And so this is an actual advertisement for a runaway enslaved woman. And so even the way they talk about the way it reads is so challenging for me. Lucy Payne, was a real person, aged about 50 years, my age, well set and fleshy, full breast, front teeth decayed, grayish hair, the nail on one of her forefingers injured, small red mark on her cheeks about 5 feet 2 or 3 inches, wears a handkerchief generally on her head. I will give the above reward, that reward of $20 if delivered to me, or $10 if secured in jail. And so, one of the reasons why I include this particular advertisement, and again, it is an actual advertisement, it's a broadside. You can find it. It was printed in the Alexandria Gazette in Virginia. And one of the reasons why I include this in is this kind of speaks to, for me, one of the reasons why even the topic of mental health can be a challenge, or treatment for mental health can even be a challenge for some of us. And because back in the day, they used to see running away, that an enslaved person running away was a symptom of mental illness. And I'm going to ask, is there anybody in particular who might be familiar with what that particular? Yes, it is. There it is. Drapetomania. That is it. That, and I mean, even saying it just, it blows my mind, because you enslave someone and then you have questions on whether or not, you know, why wouldn't someone want to be free? That seems like the most natural thing in the world. And so then thinking that that is a symptom of something that is perfectly natural is seen as something that is a sign of mental health, mental illness. And just, if you're coming with that background historically, then what does that say about mental health and mental health treatment? It's kind of pathologizing normal behavior, and some of that continues even now. And so, on that note, I think we're going to break for a second here, so we can still break for 5 minutes. Is
Yep, I
that
have it
okay?
set for 5 minutes. Yes.
Okay. And then when we come back, I'm going to switch gears, and we're going to talk about um, the idea of recovery and why and now that I've hopefully established why recovery is necessary with all of these things, we can talk about those principles when we return. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us again. And if people are still coming in, they can just get in when they're fitting. And so I want to pick up where I was leaving off, and that is talking about the idea of recovery. So one of the things I'm going to share at the end, hopefully I'll have a little time at the end to share a TED Talk that is about workplace trauma, and particularly for Black women. But one of the challenges, you know, so after talking about like all these various ways in which we are triggered and negatively impacted, one of the things I usually do, especially if I have a longer form workshop or a presentation that I'm doing, I talk about the impact And because, a lot of those things, just again, especially if you talk about the connection of mind and body, that the ways that stress are, really are known to be the root cause and magnifier of some of the ailments that we have. So one of them, that I talk about, I've experienced, a lot of the people I know experienced, being fibroids for Black women, is something that is especially again, endemic to our demographic, but it's that stress is really impactful to that particular ailment. And so just even understanding the whys of, how it comes out, sometimes, talking about the idea of substance use before. Substance use so often is looked at as, this is the problem, this is the hindrance, when it's usually a symptom of a larger problem, which is all this stuff is going on. How do I cope with it? Just on a day-to-day basis, what are the things that uh, especially when you're experiencing these things, and then um, you find yourself in these spaces where people are definitely not on the same page, not seeing the things that you see, and actively invalidating your perspective, where you can start to question, okay, wait a minute, then is it just me? Am I being sensitive, overly sensitive, hyper vigilant? Well, some of those things are. Yes, you are. And those things are also trauma responses that we rarely talk about. And that those trauma responses, the way that they appear in our communities, are often things that are dismissed as um, character flaws, right? And, those are issues of morality and values, cultural values, when it's really, we don't get the grace of being impacted. That we, over the past few years, trauma has been this buzzword that everyone is applying to so many various situations and experiences. And mind you, we know that trauma is defined individually, right? Because a situation is, it would be hard to say that a particular situation would be traumatic if different people, if the way we're impacted by it is different according to what our own values are, how we experience it, how we perceive it. And so want to avoid kind of comparing these issues, but at the same time, um you know that's kind of what it is, we're experiencing these trauma responses. um oh, I just kind of lost my train of thought. But anyway, I want to actually get to the principles of recovery, because I see time ticking and I just want to make sure I cover all of these in time. And so the first one is, because especially when you find yourself in these areas of, and you feel what your experience is, and then there are people around you who, that their automatic default is to question whether or not that experience really is your experience. And well, so for me, when generally we talk about principles of recovery, and these are adapted from uh, not only SAMHSA's you know principles of recovery, but in the idea of peer support. um, I think actually now all states have standardized peer support certifications now. California was the last state to do so, but adapted from our, our own ethics and practices. And so hope is typically that number one principle that we talk so much about in peer support. And one of the challenges for me, and one of the reasons why it was important for me to reframe that, is because when there is so much going on around you that can deflate your sense of hope, that things are pulling at you in so many different directions, that sometimes hope itself can feel like a heavy lift. And so for that, I like to try to reframe the idea as questioning. If you can um, examine the situation you're in, challenge that situation. Um, so, whether it be a situation at work that you're going, okay, um, I experienced something that was particularly uh, racist, and not just racist, but it was sexist. And so as you're examining, I went through this incident at work, and as you go to other people to explain and share, and again, generally what you get back is, are you sure? Well, could it have been this other thing? Or are you sure it was racism? I mean, did you do the checklist of all the other things that it could be before you land on the most obvious thing? And so it's the idea of you being able to go, look, I want to explore all the possibilities, and exploring the possibilities is where hope lives. And so that's why for me, that questioning part is so important. So the idea of even asking, that asking can be audacious even. And so taking that ask and going, okay, is it even possible? What are there other possibilities? Can we talk about this? And exploring, um, just all the steps that are taken in even doing that, for me, is very hope filled. It takes me to the next principle. And so and again, when I talk about questioning, it it is sometimes the idea that we get so that some of things get so normalized that we don't even realize that we're ourselves engaged in something that's harmful to ourselves, that we don't even know that we are, operating on autopilot, with internalizing this racism. Sometimes we start blaming ourselves for things that are not things that we are doing. And so another principle of recovery in terms of peer support and mental health recovery is, it is very personal. It is something that is, not only do you define the terms of what recovery means for you, you determine what it looks like for you. You determine when it needs to happen. You determine how long it's going to take, what the steps are going to be. All of that is for you, because and I know that, for some of the behavioral health providers and some of the clinicians, they are kind of trained to look at recovery in a very specific way. They have expectations of certain goals and certain milestones that they have expectations for, and they forget that, while it's you may have your own agenda, that, and it doesn't help that the way our healthcare system is set up, that we do have, that they do place timetables on the way that we recover. But one of the things we remind ourselves in peer support is that sometimes we have to, just as individuals, that we have to be able to just, you know, sideline other people's expectations because this is about me. This is about you. This is your health, right? This is your way of dealing with all these issues, and the impacts of them is when and how all of this is going to be unique to you. So it takes us to the next principle. And mind you, these aren't in any particular order, but I just kind of, for me, I like to, segue. One segues right into the other. So, for me, they're all connected. And so, in the same way that the idea of recovery is very personal, you determine all these things, you define these things. So that makes choice extremely important for that reason. And so that means all of the things that's on here, right? Your free will, so I know that this is there are people who are coming in here today from all parts of the United States, and so I don't know what some of your systems are looking like, your healthcare systems, but I know here in California we're fighting right now against some legislation that's meant to reimagine mental health care systems, and it really is forced treatment. And when you start talking about forced treatment, and I kind of understand that that's in some ways the intent of it is, it's well intentioned in some areas, but it's one of the things that is so important to recovery, and particularly when you start talking about recovery from trauma. As soon as you start talking about trauma, you have to understand how significant it is to not be forced, because usually trauma is something that's beyond your control, right? It's a situation that you found yourself in, that has been foisted upon you. And so when you're trying to undo the damage of trauma, you can't treat trauma with more force. And so that is so important to looking at any kind of treatment that you choose for yourself, that you need to be in the driver's seat. The choices need to be yours. And so that's with your agency, your discernment, and the fact that, again, because it's personal, you're the one who's going to know best what you think is going to work for you. What you know who you are better than the provider who's going to come in and probably talk to you for all of 10 to 15 minutes. Again, that's even something that's beyond their control, but they come in for a 10-15 minute evaluation. They're trying to fit a whole lifetime of experiences into a diagnosis from talking to you in 10 minutes. How? That can't happen. And so for you, you are the one who's going to understand these things more about yourself. And so it's really important for you to have those choices. And so leads me to the next slide. And that is, like I was just saying, being trauma aware. And so I chose the phrase trauma aware separately from kind of being trauma informed, in the sense that kind of trauma informed is kind of a deeper awareness, if you will, but it's like the idea that you need to even be aware of how how trauma is manifesting in your particular situation, because again, all the things that I talked about earlier are the shared experiences that you're likely to have just from being a Black woman, but let alone talk about the unique things that you've experienced from your own community, your own geographic region where you are, your own family, that there are going to be certain areas of trauma that are going to be unique to you, and that some of those things you may not even be aware of because they've been so normalized. And it's normalized for all of us to just kind of, well, you'll get over it, especially since, when we think of even about our ancestors, how many times have people, particularly other Black people, have said to you, oh, girl, it's nothing you can't handle. Girl, our ancestors went through so much. And sometimes it's almost a way to dismiss the way that what we're going through now and how you're feeling now. Um, and so, you know, to paraphrase, was it Forrest Gump? Trauma is as trauma does, right? It's, what you feel, how it impacts your life is something that you need to be aware of. And so that is a huge part of recovery. Okay. And so that's one of the things that I am very passionate about is being aware of trauma, recognizing trauma responses and particularly how they show up in various cultures and identities is significant. Okay, and so that takes me to the next one, which is holistic, because guess what? Trauma impacts and touches every part of your life, every part. And so it's one of those things where, and this was something that like, oh, it it shook me, and that is even your relationship with finances, the way you spend or save money can be related to the way you experience trauma. Everything, the way you keep your and set up your home, the way you move through the world. And so understanding and taking the time to examine the ways that it manifests in your life, because again, remember, all these things play a part in it. So how it affects you uniquely, personally, the way that it is, being aware of your trauma and how it touches all the various facets of your life, even the area that you choose for employment, what your job is, and how you've chosen your job can be dependent on how trauma affects you. And so, it is important to be aware of all of those things. Um, and so of course, the the next slide, which is kind of culture. Yes, culture. Whew. And that is, for me, when you talk about every facet of your life, that is culture. that is at the root of culture. That is culture. And so and so not just race, ethnicity, nationality. Those are the things that often come up. But culture is all the various ways you identify yourself, all the things. And so kind of like, so when I started off with that icebreaker, which is one of the reasons why I started off with that particular icebreaker, is the words that you associate with yourself, right? And so when you talk about culture, what are some of the other things that are unique to you that are cultural, shared experiences with, other community members, the way that your identity shapes your worldview. And so some of that can be as simple as, um, you know, I'm queer. I mentioned that earlier. So that is a culture in itself. But guess what else is a culture? Um, I love to say this, but okay, I might get some backlash here, but nerd culture. Okay, so when you like animation, or when you like comic books or video games, that is also a culture, right? It's being someone who is a, a bike rider. You know, if you're a cyclist, that is a unique culture. But we rarely look at these things as culture, but but they're part of who it's part of who we are. Empowerment is the next slide. And it is in much of the same way that trauma can rob us of our power, because again, it's usually things that are foisted upon us. Um, Taking back that power, empowerment is endemic to recovery, is super important. Um, okay, like again, I would like eventually like each one of these items is going to have its own I'm going to be doing a whole recording session on each one of these that I'll be putting on my website at some point. But yeah, empowerment is important. It's the idea that you, again, you're in the driver's seat, and that there's so many ways in which we are disempowered in this system, but then you find the ways, the little bits that you do have that control over. When you do have control over these things and these choices, it is especially important to examine those areas so that you know how to take back that power. Um, and that goes to the next slide, self-acceptance. That's another area of principle of recovery. And self-acceptance, for a lot of people, that can, people kind of conflate that with complacency. Oh, well, just, you're fine with who you are, so therefore you won't feel the need to improve yourself. And that's not what that means. But what self-acceptance is being able to kind of objectively recognize you for who you are, with all of your abilities, all of the limitations and restrictions, and without associating a judgment on it, that this is what it is. To paraphrase my forever first lady, one is Michelle Obama. It is what it is, right? And so that's what that is at the core of self-acceptance, is understanding this is where I am, and it's okay for you to be where you are. Leads me to that next one. And actually, self-acceptance and authenticity are hand in hand for me. But I do like talking about them separately. And that is when you can um, get to the point of where you are accepting yourself, then that is where the authenticity comes from. And mind you, I can tell you, this is probably, at least for the Black women I know, this is one of the most dual-edged areas, because it's one of those areas where it's very difficult for us to suppress this, and yet it's one of those things that so many of us, especially if we're meant to succeed in this society, is something that we're so pressured to alter about ourselves. And so creating and finding spaces where you can be your authentic self, and that starts with you being able to be your authentic self when you're alone, or when you're looking in the mirror, when you are by yourself. Do you have the negative voice that's there, picking at you and saying, telling you what you aren't, and what you should be doing? Self-acceptance is being able to kind of quiet that voice. But then authenticity is you standing that 10 toes down in who you are, and being okay with that. This is who I am. And so, and I think, yes, for me, so in a lot of in a lot of these areas, as I mentioned, even, I probably several times throughout this presentation, how connection is a very important part of recovery. And so usually this is spoken of in terms of relationships, right? And so, but one of the reasons why I choose the word connection is because, you know, being about, those relationships isn't always about other people. And so that's why choosing the word connection can mean um, the relationship you have with yourself, being connected with yourself first, again. And then because you're always going to feel out of place around other people if you can't accept yourself. If you feel awkward by yourself, then you're going to feel awkward around other people, right? And so it's that idea that in order to connect with other people and have that relationship with other people, you need to first start with yourself. And then once get that relationship with other people, it's that idea of then it expands and it grows from that, right? You start with yourself, then it goes to other people, then it goes to the community around you, and then your environment globally. So connections all important. And so, and then we end on why all of this is so important for me. And this is the crux of all that, and that is peer support, which is again, it's connected to every single one of these principles because it reinforces it and the significance of uh, finding other people, um, peers, right? And when I say peers, it's not just in the terms that we use it in the area of mental health, but it's the people who have experiences that are similar to yours, people who can identify with the perspectives that you have, or the kind of those overlapping identities. And so it's the idea that having a place where we can honor um, your point of view, your individuality, give you that agency or allow you to exercise that agency, and show up as you are. One of the mottos that we have in peer support is meeting people where they are, because we're not going to, hey, if, and this is, in social services, there can be so many prerequisites for receiving service. Oh, well, if you want to get some housing, we're going to need you to go to this program. We're going to need you to be sober for this long. We need all these things that you need before we're going to help you. And in peer support, we go, no, that's not what we do. We're going to meet you wherever you are. That's where we're going to be. And so for me, that is such an important part of how you navigate um, all of these areas of, how do you talk about, or how do you create spaces where you can have people who have those similarities and you can talk about it and have someone else validate that for you, undo and have someone, the impact of the gaslighting and the normalizing of our trauma and all of the things that we experience so often on a day-to-day basis. How do we create these spaces? And so so for me, one of the things that I do, and I will be starting in April, my first date, I still haven't gotten the time specifically, but I will be starting virtual sister circles so that you can come in, and again, it will be, you could see my website, and I'm going to see if I can enter it here. It might be actually on the next slide, but okay, so I didn't put it specifically on my slide, but where you see my name there where it has S. Thompson, that's me, at equilibriumconsulting.com. So you just, instead of the Stacy Thompson at, you just go www.equilibriumconsulting.com, and that is my website. And so I am still in the process of building it and filling out some of the information. But one of the things that you will find on there is you will find a contact. Oh, the TED Talk, of course. I'm gonna put that add that here. Let me see, where is that? And so yes, if you go to my website, you will be able to find a contact form where you can get more information on the sister circles, and of course, you can just check back on the website, and you will see, the updates, and you'll see more information being posted there. But specifically, me creating spaces for Black women specifically, and I will have actually a number of support circles for various areas of the sister circle for Black women, the family circle for LGBTQ community, outer circle for people with mental health challenges and neurodivergence. That's me also. And so and we'll have an ally circle. I intend to have an ally circle eventually, even though probably when I come for my preferred term other than ally, because I am not a fan of that word. So, but just to get other people to know this is what I'm talking about. But okay, I am seriously trying to find. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I'm gonna put the link to that TED Talk in here, and please make sure you get a chance, give yourself a chance to watch it, because it is incredibly resonant and and it's significant to the conversation that I'm having today. And so I have gotten it, and I'm going to paste it, and okay, here we go. Hopefully this gets to everybody. Okay, so I know I'm not leaving a whole lot of time for questions and feedback. And please forgive me for that, because I did a whole lot of talking for today. But are there any just leftover, are there comments or questions? Of course, you can always email me with those. And if you go to my website, you can do the contact form and ask any questions, even from today. But there's anything, I just want to leave a opportunity to come up with that.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for doing such a phenomenal job here in presenting and sharing your wisdom and expertise as always. And so, if the participants here would join me in just putting some love in the chat for Stacy, and we're going to download and save this chat so she can see. We'll
Thank
send
you,
out
Lakeisha. I am
to it.
working on a book, Miss Lakeisha.
Yes.
I've been working on it for bits and pieces and trying to figure out a way to roll it out. I think it's going to be an ebook, but yeah. Thank you for that question.
Awesome. And someone asked a question around what other word would you use instead of
So
allies?
okay, so the challenge I have with the word ally is it makes it seem like, okay, well, this is your fight and I'm joining in on your fight. And for me, it's like, well, if you recognize this as a problem, you understand that it impacts everybody, right? So you're in it with me. So it's one of those things where, not a fan of the term co-conspirator, but I do like collaborator.
Accomplice.
That's another one that I like, is a collaborator. But I'm looking for one that I'm still searching for one that resonates with me in particular. But for now, I guess I'm using ally as a placeholder. But I will eventually land on one that I like.
Awesome. And just a reminder, you will receive a certificate of completion or attendance for this session. And we will also share a copy of the slide deck and a copy of this webinar following the training. Also, we request that you will also receive a survey. Please take time to complete that survey so we also provide that feedback to Stacy. We take it as a center, as ways for us to improve, and also thoughts and ideas around what else you would like to hear about, what else you would like to learn about. So please make sure you take time to complete that.
Thank you
Any
so much.
questions?
I just want to say thank you to everyone who showed up and came today. I just thank you so much for sharing in this moment with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Oh,
Thank
Johnny
you.
said he's not able to pull up the website. Okay, I'll take a look at that probably right after to make sure that it's working. But again, just make sure you keep that that equilibrium consulting because it is spelled differently from quantum physics equilibrium. It's equilibrium as in equal. And so I'm going to make sure as soon as we finish here, I'll just make sure that I have this up and going because maybe there's something I missed.
Awesome. And just let us know, Stacy, and we'll update that in this slide so everyone will receive it with the updated link.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Any questions in the chat? Joanne, can you save the chat? I don't see the link to save the chat to share that with Stacy.
Yes, I'll get it saved and send it out to you.
Awesome. So Stacy, I will turn it over to you if you have any parting words or there's anything that you want to do to close us out. I just want to say thank
Okay.
you again for just an awesome and amazing and enlightening presentation as always.
Thank you. Well, no, that was it for me. Just thanking everybody to show up for me. Well, I actually, that was a slip that I said that I meant showing up for me. Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, and so just keep checking into the website. Here, I don't think I even put it in here, but and did I think I put in the link for the TED Talk about the workplace trauma, but
Yes.
I put it in there? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my website. And so if it's not working right now, I will look at it as soon as we're done here and make sure that address any problems, just check back, and it will be. Okay. Okay, good. Yay. All right, Tiffany got it up. Good. Thank
Yep,
you.
it's working.
Okay, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone again. Thank you for participating in this session for 365 Black and for being here as a guest. Participated in this session. Thank you to Stacy again for leading this phenomenal session, and be well, be safe, and take care until our next session next month. And Stacy will be back in June. So if you want to see or hear from Stacy again, Stacy will be back in June. So thank you for your generosity, Stacy, and for all that you do. And thank you, Joanne, for serving as tech support today. Also, big round of applause for holding that down. So thank you both. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful day.
All right. Bye.